good morning and welcome back to the channel. In last week's video we talked about exposure modes. Today we're going to talk about metering modes. Now you might be thinking to yourself, if you know a little bit about photography, just why bother? Why even bother thinking about them? You could just stick your camera on evaluative metering, switch this video off and walk away. And it's actually true, yes you can do that. But I think there's a little bit more to it than that. Because if you haven't explored spot metering, partial metering, center weighted metering and just stuck with evaluative or multi-metering, whatever you use on your brand of camera, then I think you're missing something. So let me explain why after I've set up this first photograph. So that's the camera setup. Before we go back and put the cable release on and take any pictures, I want to talk to you about those metering modes. You could just forget this altogether and just shoot quite happily all the time on evaluative metering and you would get perfectly acceptable results. The reason I think it's important to know this is because the more knowledge you have, the more underpinning knowledge you have about how your camera works, how light metering works and how this all fits together and what cameras are trying to do with this scene and expose for a scene, the better your results will be because you'll have a good underpinning knowledge and understanding of what's happening. So let's go back and give you a bit of a very short history lesson. So when camera metering was first developed and came out, obviously somebody at some point had to decide what is correct, what's correct exposure. And they came up with the fact that if you averaged out all the light levels from black right the way to white, then you would come up with a figure that is known as 18% grey. Now, that sound like a strange figure. You may think it should be 50% grey, but it isn't. It works out as an average over a scene to be 18% grey. There's more light in pictures than there are shadows normally, and I think that's the reason for it. So when a camera meters, it uses this 18% figure as its reference point. So what it's trying to do always is take everything back to that average. It says in this scene everything is 18% grey, and I'm going to average everything out until I match that figure. And that's all it's doing every time. Some of the more interesting modes, evaluative metering modes, do a little bit more mathematics. They measure different areas of the scene. They take more averages. They use an algorithm to understand the subject and try and guess things a bit. But in general, it's still doing the same thing, but in a more complex way. The metering modes we're going to look at today include that evaluative metering, but we're going to be talking about center weighted, we're going to be talking about partial metering and spot metering. In fact, partial and spot we're going to use at the same time. So for this particular picture here, I'm going to use something called center weighted, and we're going to go into that right now and set the camera up finally, and then I'll explain to you what this metering mode is doing and how it works. So let's set the camera up and take some pictures. Okay, well that's a bit annoying. Just as I finished my setup, it started to spit and rain a little bit. Rain is forecasted, so if we get a bit of rain on the camera lens, I apologise. I'm having to keep white this one, which is why I've put this cover over the top of the camera just to stop the rain so much. So, let's talk about center weighted metering. The center weighted metering is fairly self-explanatory. All the metering on the camera is weighted to the center of the picture. So if you use the whole screen, that would be 100% of it. center weighted uses about 70% of the middle of the screen, and it becomes more and more intense metering the closer you get to the center. Now it kind of makes sense if you think about it. This is the first metering mode which was really put on cameras, and it basically worked on the theory that you're going to put your subject in the middle of the frame. So if you've got a general scene and it's of average exposure values, or your subject is really important and it's generally in the middle and it's not really small or exposed, or lit in an extreme way with dark shadows or really bright highlights, then you can use center weighted. So that's what I'm going to use for this scene where I've set it up. So the scene which I've got in front of me is basically the waterfall running across the screen. Now I have put a polarizing filter on to try and cut down some of those shadows. It's not doing a lot, but I think it is helping a little bit. It adds a little bit of warmth to the scene as well. So I've got the waterfall in the centre of the frame, a little bit more behind it, a rock in the foreground just to add a little bit of interest to the scene. Now it's a little bit difficult to get you in close, partly because of the weather and the rain and the ground that I'm stood on. So I'm going to put screenshots up and show you the next bit on how I set this up. So on the Canon 5D Mark IV, to set various things on the menu, it's quite easy because you can use the touchscreen on the back of the camera. Now obviously some camera manufacturers have completely different ways of doing it, but it doesn't matter for this video. All that matters is we're talking about the same metering modes, and all of them use these metering modes to varying degrees. So when we use the back of the camera for this, I've got something called my Q button, which is my quick menu button. And on here, if I go into that mode, actually on this already, it says that I'm using evaluative metering. And if I click on the button, it gives me my metering options. So I've got evaluative, I've got partial, I've got spot, and I've got center weighted average. And that's what we're going to use for this one. So we're going to click set on that. And now the camera is in center weighted average mode. Now to take a meter reading using center weighted average mode is exactly the same as you would with any other exposure mode. It's just a matter of composing your subject, and if I haven't already, I'll put this up on the screen so you can see see what I'm actually looking at. So that's the composition sorted out. I've framed the scene up, I've taken a meter reading and focused. I've focused about a third of the way into the scene. I'm going to shoot at f11 using aperture priority mode. If you want to find out more about aperture priority mode and focusing, then you want to watch my video series on getting sharp images. I'm also going to take an exposure bracket with this, and I'm going to use the automatic exposure bracket feature on this camera. So it's going to vary the shutter speed for me as I do it, and then when we get back home in the computer we can decide on the best image that we want to take. What I've got to do before that though is I've got to clean the lens again because of the water spray that's on it. So let's talk about spot metering or partial metering. Now the reason I'm going to talk about both of these together is because essentially they do the same thing. And once again, camera manufacturers have made it very easy for us because the title gives away exactly what they do. So spot metering uses the center kind of maybe say 3% of the viewfinder image to take your meter reading from. Partial metering might use 10, 12%, something like that. It depends on your camera manufacturer, but it's around those sort of figures. So in this case, I'm going to be using the partial metering. I'm not going to bother with spot because I don't need it. The subject that I've composed here today is really the rock, which is quite brightly lit. It's wet and it's got a lot of reflected light coming off it in this screen. Now I'm going to use some rocks on the left hand side and some of the darker water on the right, the darker background and foreground to sort of frame that, because it's just the sheen and reflection on this rock that's really attracted me to take the picture. Now it's not an easy picture to take, and the reason it's not easy is because you've got that vast contrast range. But it comes down to what I was really talking about when we were talking about sharp images as well, and thinking about what actually is your subject. What is it you're trying to capture? What is it you want to show the viewer? And that also rings true when we're talking about metering modes and how we're going to meter the subject. So in this scene, what's important is the exposure of that center subject. So I'm going to use my partial metering mode to meter just off that area. We're going to do a bracket again as well, so we'll have a range of subjects around there to work on. So let's go through switching the camera into partial metering mode. So in exactly the same way that we did when we set the camera up to take pictures using center weighted metering, we can simply go into our menu on our camera. Let's say different cameras got different ways of doing it. So we can go into our quick setting mode. We can go into our metering, we can go into our metering mode and we can decide to pick the metering mode that we want. So we've been using center weighted. We're not going to use spot for this. We're going to use something called partial. So we'll put it on partial, we'll press set, and that's it. Our camera is now set up in our mode. So on the back of my viewfinder, when I set my camera up in partial or spot metering, it actually draws a circle in the centre of the screen so I can see what I'm metering. And that's one of the disadvantages of it. If your subject isn't slap bang in the middle, you have to take a meter reading before you can actually take the picture, then move it and work from there. So sometimes to do this you need to work in manual metering mode. But because my subject is in the middle of the frame, I haven't worried about it this time. I've just left it exactly as it is. So we're all set up. We've got our cable release plugged in. And sorry, I'm just distracted by Ruby. She's wandering off. Ruby, come. Right, so all I need to do now is take the picture, and it's bracketing already for me, and we'll see where we go from there. So there we are, that's the set of pictures taken. I'm going to put the one which I process up on the screen for you now. I've got one more picture to take after this, which I can actually see. I didn't expect to find it, but I can see it from where I'm stood now. So I'm going to compose that, or use the last metering mode I want to talk about, and then I can go home and process these images. So let me set those up. Just to finish up these last few pictures and talk about the final metering modes, I thought I'd set up another picture for you. When I took the last image, I could see this tree, which is really quite interesting. It's covered in mosses and ferns, and it's sort of winding its way out over the river as it flows down past. So I thought maybe it would make a nice picture. The problem with the image is going to be the fact that I need to try and separate all the greens out in the processing stage. But the tree which I'm looking at has got more yellows and oranges in it than the surrounding greens in the background. So I'm hoping by playing with some of the tones in the image that I'll be able to bring that out. And I've also put my polarizing filter on and just adjusted that for maximum polarization to cut down the sheen on any of those leaves, and also to enable me to sort of really deepen those colours a bit and cut down the reflections on the water, because I don't want those highlights on the water detracting from the main subject, which is the tree. In fact, to be honest, there's not a huge amount of water in the scene. It's all about the subject. Now, although I've framed it up, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to crop the final image. It's not going to conform to a 3:2, 3:4, 16:9 aspect ratio. It's going to be a little bit different than that, so I'm going to play with it in the final processing. So you won't see that till the end. So let's talk about the final metering mode before we take this image. So as I said right at the beginning of this video, if you wanted to, you could have really skipped to this part and ignored all the others. But I'm hoping that by going through those different metering modes and understanding how the camera wants to use 18% grey as a baseline, realising that there are alternatives that you can use, and if you have a particular subject and a particular thing that you want to bring out in the image, you can use your partial metering and your spot metering, but you'll get more out of your photography and it'll be a bit more successful. Now, evaluative metering takes some of the difficulties of exposure, making those types of decisions. It takes it away from the photographer to a certain degree, because it uses complex algorithms to understand your subject, understand what's important in the frame, and then bases its exposure on that. Now, because I do a lot of my photography in manual and I use the histogram quite a lot, it doesn't really matter for me whether I use it or not, because I can check these things as I'm taking my pictures. So I'm going to take this using evaluative metering, and it's really quite simple to set up. So basically all we're going to do is go into the menu system on the camera. On the Canon, on the back of the screen, we use our quick menu by pressing Q. We click on our metering button, and then we've got our metering modes again. We've got center average, spot, partial, evaluative. We just press set on evaluative, and that's it set up for us, and then we're ready to take our pictures. Now, like I said, it's an easy method to use it, and you can leave your camera on it all the time. So I'm not going to go into any sort of detail on it. I'm just going to take this picture. I'm going to be bracketing again, probably about 5 stops using the auto sort of like bracketing mode. We're going to shoot at f11. We're going to be focusing on the tree because that's our main subject. So if we get a little bit of out of focus with the other areas, I'm not too worried. But to be honest, at f11 and how I'm shooting, that's not going to be an issue. So when I've done this, I'll put the final image up for you. So cable release on as always. Like I said, I have used my the polarizer on this picture. So we just click on the autofocus on there. Way overexposed at the moment. But that's because it's going to do a bracket for me. So this first picture is going to be about 20 seconds. I won't make you sit through the whole 20 seconds. So that's the final picture from this bracket done. So I'm going to put this picture up on the screen for you. Just after I'd taken that last set of pictures for you, the sun come out a little bit and it illuminated those branches, so the image which I've just shown you may not have been the one that you saw me take. It's just the way it goes sometimes. Anyway, that was my last image. I just want to add to the end that I really do hope that you've got something from this video, and that if you've been doing photography for some time, then it just gives you a little bit more to think about, and whether or not you've sort of got stuck in a rut and you're just using one metering mode and not exploring the others. And if that's the case, just think about exposure a little bit more. Think about how you can use what tools you've got on your camera to help you with your photography, and it might help you take some more creative images. Really do try partial and spot metering. It can open up a whole new set of ideas for you to work with. If you're new to photography, then I hope that you got something from it, and I hope that you understand a bit more how metering works, why your camera sometimes makes things go grey because of this 18% grey figure, and you enjoyed it and you'll come back for some more. If you did enjoy it, then please give the video a thumbs up. It really does help my channel. If you enjoyed it so much that you want to stay around and see more, please subscribe, and I'd love to see you watch the other videos. But for now, that's all from me, so I'm going to see you guys next time.